Greetings, everyone, and thank you for listening to this discussion about the book PiaVindex, War and Decolonization in Indochina, Algeria, and Cameroon. This is a historical fiction, but it's based closely on events, and it traces the story of a German paratrooper, Ulrich Werner, who's involved in the Second World War, the Indochina War, the Algerian conflict, the liberation struggle for Cameroon, and also in the Vietnam War with the Americans in the 1960s. So it has effectively 5 parts to it, which we will look at in these videos. The novel starts off with the gruesome discovery of a decapitated body in the Mississippi of about 60-year-old European male, whose, it turns out, according to the pathologist, all the blood was drained from this corpse prior to its decapitation. So that sets the scene, and then the action moves to Indochina in 1950. So here is the cover of the book, PiaVindex War and Decolonization Edition. It shows a young lady of Vietnamese heritage walking on Catinat Street, which is the main night spot or entertainment thoroughfare in Saigon. Below is some paratroopers in a Dakota heading towards Dien Bien Phu. I believe that might be from the cesium battalion, Bataillon Parachutist Colonial, the 6B PC. The paratroopers heading up in the 1950s on a mission towards Tat K leave from Bac Mai, which was one of the main air logistical hubs in French Indochina's province of Tonkin. There was another airfield north of the city called Guillam, but this one, Bac Mai, was in the southeast of the city. Interesting to note that today this whole area is covered with urban sprawl and is unrecognizable, showing the impact of anthropogenic pressures on the environment over the past 75 years. Here are the paratroopers, 18 of them in the Junkers, Ju-52 aircraft, which the French still used in the 1950s. And they're flying over the paddy fields of the Red River Delta. The aircraft, the Junkers, took about 18 paratroopers. And we're in that, on the trip up north, Ulrich Werner starts to think about his life. He reflects back 10 years previously to events when he first became a paratrooper or Fallschirmjäger in the German Reich in winter 1940. This is the actual geographical situation of that flight from Bac Mai, south east of Hanoi, heading up towards the Chinese frontier to Tat K, which is the bottom circle here on this American map of the time at the particular period. And you see this route, it's going through that part of Indochina up towards Cao Bang, which was being evacuated via Dong Ke here towards Tat Ke and Lang Son further south. And all that turned into a complete disaster. But at the moment, we're focusing on this airborne operation towards Tat Ke. And this reflection of Ulrich as he is flying north. Finally, I'm home on leave. I brush ice from my parachute insignia and stamp the snow-covered doorstep. Again, I hammer urgently. Germany now masters Europe, and I'm a Fallschirmjäger. But he's surprised when Zigethius, a Nazi Gestapo man, opens the door, and obviously not that pleased, as he doesn't really trust him. There we have a picture of one of the architectural gems of Hanover before it was bombed by the British and virtually destroyed during the war. But even a few months after this event, at the height apogee of German power in World War II, 220 British planes bombed Hanover in February. And that was a premonition of what was to become, what was the devastation of the Reich. But inside, in this Christmas dinner, you have a number of characters who are meeting, and two of them are Weiss, who's an Algerian Jew, an academic of a liberal disposition, and he's confronted by his nemesis, who is Zigethius, the Nazi Gauleiter and Gestapo man who believes in the regime and is suspicious of Weiss, although he doesn't know that he's of Jewish extraction. Ulrich, when he's met by his girlfriend Penelope, who's a nurse training in the technical university there in Hanover. Here's Ulrich, the young paratrooper, who's 19. He brushes past Sophie, who is a quite serious, austere daughter of his friend and mentor Agamond, who's had battle experience in Norway and Holland. Then Ulrich is given the ring that he was caressing in the aircraft just previously, and that catalyzed his reflections. Cassandra is interested in archaeology because her father, Zigethius, the Nazi Gestapo man, they live in Haubach, which was as a site of a Roman ruins. The daughter of Weiss, the Algerian Jew, is Circe. She's not actually present at that meeting, but Clytemnestra, the wife of Agamond, is there. She's a former opera singer, and she has a relationship, covert relationship with Zigethius. There's Penelope, Ulrich's girlfriend, who is a medical student, as I mentioned, and she's not really interested in politics. Here is the ring that Cassandra gives to Ulrich, and that catalyzes his memory, and it really has some inscriptions, basically, from the era of Germanicus. Germanicus invaded Germania in AD 14 and 15, if memory serves. His objective was to punish the Cherusci tribe for their attack a few years previously in AD 9 on Varus's legion and wiping out of those Roman troops at Calcurese, I believe. Calcurese. Anyway, that is where the ring comes from. That sparks Ulrich's memories. The other aspect to the relationship among the guests is that Ulrich's father was a Captain Lieutenant Ludwig Brockholt. In the First World War, he captained an airship, a Zeppelin, basically, that headed from Bulgaria in the German sphere during the World War I, and it was heading down towards Tanzania to help Leto Vorbeck's troops in East Africa. There was a campaign going on in East Africa between the British colonies of Kenya, troops from there, as well as South Africa and Rhodesia, who were fighting Leto Vorbeck and quite unsuccessfully trying to track him down. Vorbeck continued to fight throughout the First World War to beyond the end of it, but he was very desperately short of supplies. In 1917, there was an attempt to resupply him by airship because, of course, the Allies had control of the sea, the Royal Navy. So LZ-59, or the Africa ship, was sent out from Yambol in Bulgaria, loaded with guns, ammunition, food, medical supplies, and iron crosses. It's had a problem over Sudan, the Sudanese desert. Not only was it being pursued by British fighters from Egypt, but due to the severe atmospheric conditions in the desert, with a contrast between the freezing nights and the burning days, that affected its flight basically and caused pressure on the troops, and the transmission mechanism broke down effectively. But they did receive a strict order to return to base because the mission was compromised. Actually, it turns out Forbeck couldn't meet them at the rendezvous because of Allied interference. But anyway, there was a conflict there, and Zegetius' father refused to turn back and wanted to press on. And in the end, there was a altercation with Ludwig Brockholt, Agamemnon's father, and Zegetius' father was pushed out of the aircraft in that, or fell from the airship and died. So obviously Zegetius hates Agamemnon, basically. Now, a few months later, Ulrich and Agamemnon are dropped over Crete and Operation Mercure to take the island by airborne envelopment. And it turns out that the plan by the Germans was disastrously underestimated the Allied power and presence on the island, but the Allies themselves did not have any aircraft available, and they were short of artillery, and their communications were poor. It was a close-run battle with the main objective was the airport at airfield at Melemi on the western end of Crete, and Hill 107, which dominated it. Unfortunately, I believe New Zealand captain who was in charge of the defense of the hill, which couldn't really communicate with reinforcements because the distance was too far. The Allies were expecting a seaborne invasion as well, so they spread their troops a bit too far. This area to the west of Melemi airfield was unguarded effectively, and the Germans could recoup here. And they managed to push the Allied from the hills, and effectively the New Zealanders abandoned Hill 107, which was the kind of critical mistake of the Allies, of Freyberg, who was defending Crete. But the idea was to pull out then, basically. They gave, once the Germans started landing loads and loads of reinforcements, the situation turned against the Allies, and they headed south to evacuate Crete. Now, after that, because of the resistance of the Cretans was strong, very strong, and surprised the Germans, and the Cretans committed a number of atrocities themselves against the Germans, or the Germans alleged that they did in any way. Then they were ordered to carry out reprisals against the civilian population, particularly at Condamari, notably. And there, Ulrich rescues a Greek priest who actually spoke German, but lived in Germany, was kind of sympathetic to the Germans in a way. He's rescued by Ulrich, and later on will join him in his adventures in Indochina. The war turns against the Germans eventually, and by 1943, the Germans have been extirpated from North Africa. The Americans have landed in North Africa, and they're caught and extirpated out of the continent. But the next phase is the Allied invasion of Sicily, Operation Husky, which takes place from the 9th to the 14th of July, a seaborne invasion with deception to give the Germans the impression that the Allies were going to be invading Greece. That worked, Operation Mincemeat, I believe. And the Germans soon found themselves in a difficult position in Italy, but managed to evacuate towards Messina and across to Italy. The Allies launched an airborne operation on Catania to try to prevent the German retreat or intercept it, but that proved to be a bit of a failure because there was a lot of friendly fire on the air transport aircraft. Many of them were destroyed, and the drop was pretty poor and scattered the paratroopers all over the place. And the Germans did themselves, ironically, reinforce the Sicily with airborne troops, and Ulrich was dropped into or landed in Sicily. Here we have German troops in Italy preparing to fly to Sicily in July 1943, boarding the Junkers aircraft and about to jump. After the fall of Sicily, Ulrich is posted to the Eastern Front. At the end of that year, the situation is desperate. The Russians are counterattacking, and this is the start of the Carpathian offensive. They're breaking through at Plimsty for the beginning of the Dnieper Carpathian offensive to drive southwest and cut Army Group South off from the rest of the Wehrmacht forces and basically extirpate the Axis from Ukraine. During those battles, Ulrich comes across Lecueva, who was a French volunteer in the LVF, Légion Volontaire Française, who were fighting with the Germans and later became part of Division Charlemagne. There you can see the Soviet advances from December 1943 to the April of the following year. By the end of April, they're pushing into Romania. Ulrich is injured, and Lecueva, both of those are injured, and they have to go from Bucharest all the way back to Warsaw by train to get medical facilities and treatment. But of course, the Russians are pushing, so it's a really dreadful journey. And notice also from Bucharest, you've got north of there the Romanian oil fields at Crete, which were targeted by the Allies in one of the most disastrous operations of the American United States Air Force in an attempt to disable the oil fields and interdict oil flows to the German army. As the situation of the Reich deteriorates, Ulrich is posted back to Germany, and then after his treatment, and then to the Western Front to counter the Allied Overlord operation and prevent the breakout of the Allies from Normandy. And one of the critical hubs is Carentan, a city in Normandy, which behind the American beaches, and it was a sort of a crossroads there. And the 101 Air Force was 101 Airborne, 101st Airborne was sent to take that from the German Fallschirmjäger, as well as their other forces. In the end, the Germans were pushed out, and Ulrich makes a run for the city of Brest on the coast, but it's cut off. As the Americans surround it, but the fight is to take Brest takes a very long time. I don't think it's till September 1944 that city is finally taken, and there's the wreckage. It was a terrible cost, and it never proved a use. Well, it couldn't be rehabilitated quickly as an Allied port. Meanwhile, in Germany, the Allied bombing continues, and with the daylight bombing of the United States Air Force, and then well, actually, at the time it was the Army Air Corps, but and a nighttime bombing by the Royal Air Force. Clytemnestra is killed in the raids. That shows the picture of devastation of Hanover after the war, immediately after the war. Zegethius manages to escape because he's been involved. He obtains secrets of the rocket program, the V2 rocket program. Is useful to the Americans who want to obtain this technology. So when the prisoners who are captured, and Ulrich is captured in Brest, there are sent across the Atlantic in Camp Clinton, which is near the Mississippi. There's a meeting with Zegethius and a confrontation, and Zegethius' friend, this Comanche, intervenes, and they become friends. He becomes friend with this Native American Indian. But he's offered the choice. He's repatriated to Europe and offered the choice either imprisonment or serve in the Legion. He opts for that option, and he's given his basic training, and then he heads for Mersa-el-Kibir and the Johann de Witt, bound for Saigon, Indochina, in Cochin, China, one of the provinces of the Pearl of the East, or Indochina. There you see the Legion training hub and center in Algeria at Sidi Bel Abbes, the 1st Regiment Étranger. That's where Ulrich undergoes his basic training and on the ship out to Indochina, there's Mersa-el-Kibir, which is the port from which he leaves to go to the Far East, the main naval base in Algeria. And don't forget, the French kind of hate the British for their attack by the Royal Navy in 1940, Operation Catapult, when James Somerville, Vice Admiral Somerville, basically fires on the French fleet and destroying the battleship Bretagne. About 1,000 sailors, French sailors, were killed. Also from Mersa-el-Kibir later on in 1948, the Premier Battalion Étranger parachutist leaves for Indochina a bit later than when Ulrich leaves, because he leaves as a member of the 3e Army Régiment Étranger d'Infanterie as an infantryman in the 3rd Foreign Legion regiment there. But subsequently, the two paratrooper battalions of the Legion will be sent out to Indochina from this main port again in 1948 and 1949. So Mersa-el-Kibir on the Johann de Witt, bound for Saigon. There's the ship, and on it, Ulrich meets a number of characters, including Mesrag, who is an Arabic of Arabic heritage, and he has been basically cajoled into joining the Legion or facing execution in Algeria for his rebellious activity against the colonial regime. Subsequently, you remember the Greek priest who Ulrich saved in Crete in 1941. He also heads out to Indochina, although not on this particular ship. He also has joined the Legion as chance would have it. There are a number of other colonial troops on the ship, including the Senegalese riflemen, tirailleurs sénégalais, but they're kept in the bowels of the ship. So essentially, you can see from that treatment of the passengers, various passengers, the sort of racial hierarchy operating in the French colonial system at that time. There's some references for the first section of this discussion about PiaVindex. But obviously this is an eclectic small sample of the resources which were used in the book, but anything that's been missed out, that's inadvertently it's just an eclectic example if you want to pursue this matter further. But we're going to close the first section of the book, end of part one, or part one of this tour. Thank you so much for your attention. Please join me in the second part, which will cover the Indochina War.